Her father killed Mama for birthing twins. Now only a giant rancher can save us. Chapter 1. Blood on the Floorboards. The night was so still you could hear the crickets outside the cabin walls, their song broken only by the whimpering of two newborn girls. Their tiny fists waved helplessly in the cold lantern light. Mary lay weak on the straw mattress, her breath shallow, her face pale from the long hours of labor. She had done nothing wrong. She had only given life. Yet in the shadows stood her husband, Ezekiel, his eyes burning with something darker than the night. "Two girls," he muttered, pacing the room like a trapped wolf. "Not a son. Never a son. Useless mouths is all you've given me." Mary's trembling hand reached toward the babies swaddled beside her. She whispered, "They are blessings, Zeke. Please, don't." But his rage drowned her plea. In their small prairie home, where the wind rattled the windows and the smell of blood lingered heavy, Ezekiel did what no father, no husband, no man should ever do. With a flash of steel and a roar of anger, he silenced the woman who had once been his bride. The cries of the twins grew louder, shrill with hunger and fear, as their mother's final breath left her lips. By morning, the neighbors whispered of what had happened, though none dared step too close. Men in the settlement shook their heads, muttering that Ezekiel had always been a cruel man, while women clutched their own babes tighter, thanking God their homes weren't ruled by such violence. But it was the twins, Lydia and Hope, who bore the weight of that night. Orphans in all but name, cursed in the eyes of their father, unwanted in a world already too harsh. At barely 6 years old, Lydia remembered the screams. She remembered clutching her baby sister's hand as their father stormed about the cabin, cursing them for being girls. Hope, younger by only minutes, never spoke of that night, but her silence was heavy, as if the shadows of their mother's death still pressed against her chest. And so the sisters grew up in fear. Every step was careful, every word measured. They learned that hunger was easier to bear than their father's wrath. Until one morning, when bruises covered Lydia's thin arms and Hope's lip bled fresh, they decided enough was enough. The road stretched long and empty, dust swirling beneath their bare feet. They carried nothing but a bundle of bread crusts wrapped in cloth and the desperate hope of escape. Their father's shouts still rang in their ears, but beyond the ridge lay freedom, or so they prayed. By dusk, their small bodies trembled with exhaustion. Hope's voice broke in a whisper. "Lydia, where do we go?" Lydia lifted her chin, her voice steadier than she felt. "Mama once told me about the big rancher west of town. Folks say he's strong as an ox, but kind. Maybe," her throat caught, "maybe he'll help us." They followed the fading light until the horizon opened wide to endless pasture, where fences stretched like arms across the land. And there, silhouetted against the sinking sun, was the figure of a man. He was enormous, broad-shouldered, with a frame that seemed carved from the earth itself. A wide-brimmed hat shaded his eyes, and in his hand he carried a rope coiled with ease, as though it weighed nothing at all. His presence was enough to silence the prairie winds. The twins froze. The giant rancher turned, his gaze falling upon the two ragged girls. For a long moment he said nothing. Only the snort of a horse nearby broke the stillness. Then, with a voice deep as thunder yet strangely gentle, he asked, "What are you doing out here all alone?" Lydia's courage cracked, and tears welled. She dropped to her knees, clutching Hope's hand, and cried out the words that had burned in her chest for years. "Please, sir, our father killed our mama for giving birth to us. He hates us for being girls. Please, giant rancher, help us." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the sound of the twins sobbing into the dust. The man slowly knelt, lowering himself to their level. His hands, large and scarred from years of hard work, hovered uncertainly before gently resting on their shoulders. His jaw tightened, and in his eyes flickered a storm that matched the weight of their words. "You're safe now," he said, voice firm. "As long as I draw breath, no man will ever harm you again." And for the first time in their short, painful lives, Lydia and Hope believed it. The rancher's oath. The ranch house was nothing like the girls had known. Its walls smelled of cedar and smoke, not rot and anger. A fire glowed in the stone hearth, throwing warmth across the wide room. Above the mantel hung a faded picture of a woman with soft eyes, long gone, yet her presence seemed to linger in every corner. The giant rancher, his name was Caleb Boone, set down 2 bowls of stew on the rough-hewn table. The twins sat stiffly, hands folded in their laps, as though afraid to touch anything. "Eat," Caleb said simply, his voice gentler than his size suggested. "There's more where that came from." Lydia glanced at Hope, then slowly lifted her spoon. The first taste made her eyes water, not from pain, but from the unfamiliar comfort of food that filled rather than starved. Hope followed, nibbling like a sparrow, but soon both bowls were empty, the girls' hunger overtaking their fear. Caleb watched without a word, his face unreadable. When they finally leaned back, bellies full for the first time in months, he spoke. "You said your father killed your mama." His tone was low, careful. "And he's been raising you since?" Lydia swallowed hard. "Not raising. Beating. He says we were curses. He never wanted us." Caleb's jaw tightened, the muscles in his neck standing out. For a long time he said nothing, then finally pushed back his chair and stood, his massive frame casting a long shadow. "No child is a curse," he rumbled. "Don't you ever believe that?" Hope's lip trembled, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to weep openly. Caleb crouched beside her, one large hand awkwardly brushing a tear from her cheek. "You've carried too much hurt," he murmured. "But that ends here." Life on the ranch. The days that followed felt like stepping into another world. Caleb gave the twins small chores, feeding chickens, gathering eggs, carrying water. Nothing too heavy, but enough to give them purpose. For the first time, they felt useful, not punished. At night, Caleb would sit by the fire, sharpening his knife or mending tack, while the girls whispered to each other on the rug. Sometimes Hope, timid and soft-spoken, would hum the lullabies she barely remembered their mama singing. Lydia, bolder, asked questions about the horses, the cattle, the land. Caleb answered patiently, though his voice always carried the weight of a man who had known solitude too long. Slowly, the girls began to laugh again, quiet at first, then freely, as if rediscovering the sound of their own joy. But shadows still lurked beyond the fences. The father returns. It was nearly a fortnight after they arrived when dust rose on the horizon. Caleb, mending a fence post, spotted a lone rider cutting across the prairie, riding hard. His gut tightened. Ezekiel. The man rode like fury itself, his face twisted, his clothes ragged from drink and rage. He stormed into the yard, dismounting before his horse had even stopped. "You!" Ezekiel spat, pointing a finger at Caleb. "You've got my girls. Hand 'em over." From the porch, the twins clutched each other, faces white with terror. Caleb stepped forward, calm but immovable. "They're not yours anymore." Ezekiel sneered. "The law says otherwise. Blood's blood. You can't keep him." Caleb's gaze was steady, his voice a low growl. "Blood don't make a man fit to be a father. And you lost any right to them the day you laid hands on their mama." For a moment, the air crackled with tension. Ezekiel's hand twitched toward the pistol at his belt. Caleb, unarmed but unflinching, took one slow step closer. "You best think twice," Caleb warned, his tone carrying the weight of thunder. "'Cause if you raise that gun, you'll never lift it again." Ezekiel faltered, seeing not just a man, but a wall of strength that could not be moved. With a snarl, he spat into the dust. "This ain't over, Boone. You'll regret crossing me." He swung onto his horse and rode off, but his threats lingered like storm clouds on the horizon. The storm breaks. That night, Caleb sat by the fire, staring into the flames. The girls huddled close, fear in their eyes. Lydia whispered, "He'll come back, won't he?" Caleb looked at them both, his voice steady as steel. "Yes. Men like him don't quit easy." He leaned forward, resting his massive hands on his knees. "But hear me now, you're mine to protect. And I swear by the God who made us, he won't lay another finger on you." The twins leaned into him then, small bodies pressed against his broad frame. For the first time since their mama's death, they felt the steady rhythm of a heart that beat not with anger, but with promise. The final confrontation. The attack came 3 nights later. The ranch lay silent under a moonless sky when the crash of breaking glass shattered the stillness. Caleb was on his feet in an instant, shotgun in hand. Ezekiel burst through the door, wild-eyed, reeking of whiskey, a pistol raised. "They're mine!" he roared. The twins screamed, cowering behind the hearth. Caleb stepped between them and the intruder, his frame filling the room. "You had your chance," Caleb said, voice like a growl of a grizzly. "It ends tonight." The 2 men clashed in a storm of fists and fury, the cabin shaking with the violence of their struggle. Ezekiel fought with the desperation of a man who had nothing but hate left to lose, but Caleb fought with the strength of a man who had something to protect. At last, with a thunderous crack, Ezekiel's pistol clattered across the floor. Caleb pinned him, breath-heaving, eyes blazing. "You'll never touch them again," Caleb spat. And with that, he hauled the man to his feet and threw him out into the dirt like the refuse he was. By dawn, Ezekiel was gone. Whether he fled or simply vanished into the prairie, no one knew. The twins never saw him again. A new beginning. In the weeks that followed, the ranch grew brighter. The girls found safety not only in Caleb's home, but in his heart. Lydia, once hardened by fear, bloomed with courage. Hope, long silenced by grief, sang again as she tended the hens. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Lydia looked up at Caleb and whispered, "Are we your daughters now?" Caleb's throat tightened. He knelt, pulling both girls into his arms. "I ain't much for words," he said hoarsely, "but yes, you're mine now, and I'll spend the rest of my days proving it." The prairie wind swept soft around them, carrying the sound of new laughter where once there had been only sorrow. And so it was that 2 orphaned girls, born into cruelty, found a father not by blood, but by choice, a giant rancher who chose love over fear, and who kept his oath to protect them all his days.